So as Mike mentioned, we're going to now move into a panel discussion featuring our presenters from earlier in the day. And during this discussion, we'll be asking our panelists questions that were submitted by you that came through the question and answer, the Q&A module throughout the day. So please continue to submit any questions you have, and we'll collect them for other panel discussions as time allows. So for this panel discussion, please welcome back Brian Dursey, Troy Wood, Kevin O'Brien, Dr. Lynch, and Dale Gubbles, as they share their insights on tackling these global challenges. So I'll toss out a couple of questions, but I think that was a great way to end and segue into this by Dale, because our keynote speaker, Sean, had mentioned something in his presentation, the whole purpose of the why. And he had mentioned that we should be doing things for a purpose, and we should build for a purpose, and we should also build for a profit. So it looks like there might be some solutions for actually making a profit out of this problem. But first, we have to go back to collecting the debris, recycling it, make it into something useful. So let's see what we have for questions for the panel. First question is going more to Brian and Troy for either of you, and you both could chime in. Are there any legislative initiatives that could support fiberglass recycling that you're aware of in your area?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of any that are requiring fiberglass to be recycled. However, our program has a statement in its statute saying that when we dispose of a vessel, we're supposed to do it in an environmentally friendly way. And so we no longer scuttle vessels in Washington State because we're just throwing more trash on our property. And we want to get it out of the environment and from it affecting the environment as well. So we try and recycle everything that we can.
I'll just add to that there was federal legislation submitted by Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island called Save Our Seas 2.0, and Section 136 specifically did focus on studying more about the fiberglass recycling program to see how it could be expanded. So there is some initiative and effort out there legislatively.
Appreciate your response. And another question for Troy while we have him here. How are you able to determine the vessel has been in a single location more than 90 days out of 365 days? Are you ticketing them? Are you marking the vessels? This goes back to your statement that boat owners could move their boat every month and get away with it, but if they don't, they're not in compliance. So can you address if you're ticketing them and how you're tracking the movement?
We always encourage ticketing. However, that doesn't always occur. So what we do is we take pictures with GPS coordinates on it, as well as timestamps, so that we can use that in court as to how long the vessel has been in those locations and stuff. If we can't prove it in court, then we don't assert that out there in the field either. So most of the time what we do is we have like port districts, they have a camera pointed at a location or something like that, and that's how we track those vessels, is through cameras like that. And eyewitness reports. So if someone lives on shore right next to, and they have a boat in their backyard or something like that, then we'll encourage them to take pictures of it for us, and we'll monitor it that way.
Yep, documentation is always a great thing, right?
Yes.
The more we can collect via photographs, and your agency has a wonderful, I wrote it down, a wonderful app that you called
DART.
Yes, My Coast app as well, where you can tag vessels, upload their position, correct?
Yes. So we get an email, a notification that someone has posted a vessel on their website. And then what we'll do is we'll go on there and comment on those postings saying that we put it in our system or we have removed this vessel or we're in the process or something like that, just to keep the public updated on those vessels.
Boat US will be back in touch with you, Troy, on that one, because we're working on a database, a national database, to help identify how large scale the problem is. Yours only covers Washington State. You mentioned that in your presentation, that with the funds you have, it only makes sense to collect vessels that are within your state borders with your state money. And so maybe the last question for you, Troy, is how successful has reimbursement to the DNR been for the removing of abandoned vessels?
I am proud to say in the last couple of bienniums that we've had 100% reimbursement rate. There have been pasts where they didn't contact us prior to doing the removal, and therefore they didn't put in a bookmark for those funds, because we're allowed to bookmark funds for projects. And if they don't put in a bookmark, we save them until the end of the biennium. And then what we do is we pay them with whatever's left over in our account. And in past bienniums, it was only like 60% for a few of them. So unfortunately, they had to cover the other 40% for those removals. However, since we've been really aggressive with these bookmarks and educating our authorized public entities, we have been 100%. And with the addition of the watercraft excise tax, our statutes say that we can reimburse up to 100% as well with those funds. Prior to that, we were only allowed to reimburse up to 90%. And so there was a 10% cost for the authorized public entity, but now it's 100%.
That's a fantastic record. I'd take that any day. 100% sounds like it's pretty unbeatable. So congratulations.
Last biennium, it was $1 million that we reimbursed our authorized public
A
entities.
significant amount. No
It is,
small amount.
yes.
Kevin, Sean Thompson talked a lot about I will, and if you missed his presentation, he really wanted everyone involved to come up with what is the purpose and what is your I will. And one of his 12 mantras in his surfer code was, I will pass on my stoke. So I love to see all the representation from you all out in your direction in Hawaii, passing on the excitement for what you're doing and collecting the debris. So a question from someone in our audience is, can you give me some more insight on the advantage of freediving over scuba for the removal of your nets and the shoreline surveys? Are you collecting that data? Why freedive? And then the last comment from this this participant was, thanks for the great work you're doing. So that came straight from a participant. So tell us about freediving.
Sure. Most of what we find on the reefs is actually between 0 and 15 feet of depth, and we don't really go any deeper than 30. And so the density of the accumulation of this derelict fishing gear is so high that you might swim, 100 yards and find a net, remove it, swim another 100 yards, find a net, remove it, and on throughout the course of an entire day, where if you're scuba diving, you're bounce diving, you're going up and down and up and down. And then you have all this equipment that you have to deal with and make sure you have full tanks. And if you saw our boats, to be able to get into these really tight, shallow reef areas, they're pretty small. They're only 19 feet. So we actually don't have room for a bunch of sets of scuba gear. Not only that, just the depths that we're talking about, freediving is just so much more nimble. You don't really need it. And so, scuba has been tried over the years, but it's just ultimately not necessary. So especially when you're out there for a couple months every year, everybody gets really in the groove, and you can hold your breath for many, many minutes. Might as well have a tank on your back.
Yes, sir. Avoiding entanglement and entrapment, as you showed the pictures of all of those bycatches and turtles and other mammals that find their way into nets. I can understand why the extra scuba gear could be a danger to those of you that do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
Oh. Something that Dr. Jennifer Lynch brought up, she made a very pointed comment or observation that the nets aren't coming from your local fishermen. They're coming from very far away. Why aren't fishermen more responsible with their nets? This is the question. Why aren't fishermen more responsible with their nets and other gear? Do they know what happens when leaving gear in the water? What are the incentives? And why do you think they end up in the water in the first place?
It's a really tough and important question to ask that. And unfortunately, we haven't talked to any trawl fisheries in Asian countries to ask them how they lose their gear, why they lose their gear, whether it's abandoned intentionally or not. And so we don't have an answer for that question, unfortunately. In talking to Alaskan trawlers, we learn that they very rarely lose their gear. They try very hard not to lose their gear because it is pricey. The nets that we do see wash ashore in Hawaii are not of the high price quality. They are the lower price, or maybe it is less concerning for fishermen that are using those low quality nets. They might be able economically to lose them easier because they're cheaper to replace. And we know that fishing gear is lost because of snags on the bottom. We know that they're lost because of extreme weather events, just lost right there off of the docks and the shorelines, tsunamis, typhoons, flooding. We know that gear is lost. Well, there are some clear indicators that some of the gear that we see is intentionally thrown overboard. And it's that kind of behavior that I think we could prevent if we could educate the sources of these fisheries and inform them that their gear is washing up and being found somewhere else. The reason we know that is there's often these cutouts where it's this perfect square or triangle of the trawl net, and there's a big rip or hole in the middle of it. So it's very obvious that they snagged it and they ripped their gear, and then they did a cutout of a very geometric piece. And unfortunately, that ended up in the ocean, and then they repaired that section of their net to continue fishing. So we do see those. So we do suspect that there is intentional discard overboard.
You
And
had a very convincing pie chart in your presentation indicating the amount or percent of nets coming perhaps locally versus from Asia. And so there's a question that I believe you've already answered. Is there an interest from the Asian countries for this information? And has this data been used, or can it be used for legislative efforts to try to get other countries to help with this issue?
I can answer the first question. I'm going to stay away from legislative questions. The first question is whether there's interest in those countries in this information. I would say there is. There's a couple organizations out there called the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, which is part of Ocean Conservancy, and they work internationally to try to develop best practices for fisheries to not lose their gear or to recover their gear. And they're quite interested in this. And the GGI, as it's known, Global Ghost Gear Initiative, has members from all across the world, including Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. And those members do come to the meetings, and we share information back and forth to say, hey, we think that this looks like something may be used in Taiwan. Is it? And, you know, they can kind of confirm that information. So we do talk scientist to scientist. I do know that Korea and Taiwan recently gave talks about their efforts of gear marking. Gear marking is a really positive mitigation of gear loss. So if your gear is marked and then it is lost, it is easier to trace it back to the source. And so both of those economies are looking at gear marking legislation in their countries to try to help source this.
Good. Next, not necessarily a question for Dale, but a comment by me is that in some point in Dale's presentation, he mentioned the point of collecting trash where people gather. However, in Kevin's case, he's collecting trash where there's no one that gathers other than the mammals and the critters that are out there. So your work is, all of you, your work reaches far and wide. We're going to go back up to Troy and put Troy a little bit on the spot. And I'm going to have Troy compare what his term recycling means and compare that to what Brian's definition of recycling is. And I'll just summarize for Brian. Brian is truly recycling every bit and scrap and attempting to make it into something great. But I'm not sure I got the same thing from Troy. So putting Troy on the spot, what does Washington DNR recycling fiberglass means? Are you doing it the same way or in a similar way as RIMTA, which is Brian's organization?
No, for a couple of reasons. One, we don't have the manpower to do the recycling ourselves at DNR, so we hire companies to do that for us. This company called DTG in Washington is actually recycling. They drop off yard bins, 40-yard yard bins. We throw a bunch of boats in there, and they take it back to their facilities and break it up into its components. And then they sell those components to people who might be in manufacturing or something like that. So they could sell the fiberglass to another company that might make something out of those fibers and stuff like that. And if they don't, the fiberglass and the wood products can be burned as hog fuel in the manufacturing of concrete and paper. So it's being used at least another time. The stuff that they can't recycle ends up in a landfill, unfortunately, but that's better than 100% of the vessel going to a landfill. And that's what our other option was, and how it has always been. We've always been trying to recycle these vessels for the last decade. We only found this company doing this recently because they acquired another company that allows them to chip these vessels up into small pieces and stuff like that. So it's a new thing. In fact, I just got notified today that there might be another company here in Washington that's interested in recycling vessels. So this is what we've been hoping for from the beginning, is that the industry will drive the need for recycled materials. And right now we have 2 private companies in Washington state that are willing to take vessels and recycle them as much as they can.
Great answer. And thanks for letting me put you on the spot. It's not to say that you're not doing anything. This is a huge step, and we need more people. We need more partners. We need more industry, and perhaps, as Dale mentioned, more profit. Someone who's really interested in taking a deep dive and finding out what's usable on these vessels, perhaps in the way and the means of recycling, because there are boats that have aluminum, stainless, even lead, as you mentioned in your presentation, Troy. So thank you very much. I only have 1 more minute, and I think I'll ask the last question again of Troy and anyone that wants to jump in. But the question is being asked by someone in attendance: what happens when you actually find a boat that's in serviceable condition? Does that ever happen? Who benefits from the sale? Is there any profit to be made from finding an abandoned or derelict vessel? Anyone wants to answer? Troy?
So it happens rarely. And when it does, we tend to sell them in a way that it goes to a responsible vessel owner, because we put a lot of stipulations on the sale, like insurance and mortgage and stuff like that, in order for them to buy it. And it's never profitable. So we have to set it out for bid, and usually that you're only talking about the most we made on one vessel that used to be a Coast Guard cutter in the surf. It's a 40-foot workboat with 2 diesel engines. We sold that for $25,000. So,
Well, I suspected that was going to be your answer. That was a good, positive way to end our panelist discussion. I don't suspect that'll be true for every vessel that's collected, certainly not. But I need to move on. I want to thank all of the panelists for this discussion, answering the questions that were posed by those in attendance, and we'll continue to encourage people to ask questions within the Q&A module so we can collect those and ask more questions of panelists as we carry on for the next 2 days. So thank you, panelists. Next, I'm going to introduce Joe Barnes. This session will be moderated by Joe Barnes, Marine Debris Project Coordinator at Old Dominion University. Joe will introduce our panelists today, his panelists, and lead the discussion on Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, VMDRP. The VMDRP seeks to understand, prevent, and mitigate the impacts of consumer debris, derelict fishing gear, microplastics, and abandoned and derelict vessels. So welcome, Joe.
I will speak for Joe real quick that we're getting him and the panel in right now. So just bear with us 1 minute as we get everybody on screen.
I'll just do a test run. Can you all hear me? Awesome.
We can hear you, Joe. And I think we're getting the final of everybody on screen so you can get started.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. As said, my name is Joseph Barnes, and I am the Marine Debris Project Coordinator at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, which is part of a project funded through Virginia Sea Grant. I will be moderating today's discussion on collaborative actions for addressing abandoned and derelict vessels, or ADVs, and related marine debris sustainability issues. Our hope for this panel is to continue building close relationships across partners in the ADV sphere in Virginia and provide you ideas and insights into how you can apply this movement building process in your region. And as our panelists introduce themselves, I'll put their names, organizations, and contact information in the chat. So I will pass over to the order in which I see in my screen. So we can start with Jeff.
Hey folks, I'm a coastal planner with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program in Richmond, Virginia. We're led by our state Department of Environmental Quality, but we're a network coastal program, so we tap into many other state agencies, localities, and a lot of NGO partners and academic institutions as well. And I will be talking mostly about abandoned and derelict vessels and the state's role in that.
Thank you. Abigail?
Hi, everybody. My name is Abigail Clark, and I'm the Clean Marina Program Specialist here at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. So I work with marinas in Virginia, and we certify marinas into our program that engage in environmental practices. And our program is completely voluntary. They don't have to do any of this, so that's always good to see. So they fill out a questionnaire. We cover a range of topics, everything from stormwater pollution to safe fueling. And then at VIMS, we also collect monofilament for recycling. In the last year, we've collected over 150 pounds of monofilament for recycling. And then we also run the Clean Boater program, which encourages boaters to recycle. Think about what they're taking on board with them. That could eventually become a marine debris, and engage in other environmental practices like that. And then on the ADV side of things, we're working on developing language that marinas can use in order to have their contracts with their boaters. And with that, I will pass it on to Vincent.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vince Bowers. I'm the restoration coordinator for Lynham River Now, which is a Virginia Beach-based nonprofit that works on protecting and restoring waterways in our local area. We have a NOAA grant program for abandoned derelict vessel removal throughout coastal Virginia. And we are also working on a capacity to build a statewide program to remove and prevent vessels. And I'll pass it on to Wee.
Thank you, Vince. I'm Wee Youssef. I'm a professor in the School of Public Service at Old Dominion University. I'm a what I call quasi Virginia Sea Grant Extension partner. At ODU, I lead the Resilience Collaborative, which is a research group that studies the interconnected issues of how people, places, and policies affect and are affected by resilience in the coastal zone. I lead a Sea Grant funded project that is focused on building connections and building partnerships as part of this broad coalition idea, pulling together organizations and individuals to address marine debris concerns in coastal Virginia. Tom, on to you.
Thanks, Lee. Just rounding out this group, I'm a professor of geography at Old Dominion University. I teach and do research in applications of geographic information systems and remote sensing, mostly for hazards and coastal resource management and kind of planning application supports. In this project, I'm exploring the application of drones in the marine environment in support of abandoned derelict vessels and other marine debris. And so that includes uncrewed aerial vehicles, what most people think of traditionally with drones, but also uncrewed autonomous surface vessels, or ASVs, small ASVs, the size of tabletop or even smaller, that can carry multiple sensors. So particularly we're interested in exploring the use of these to discover, inventory, monitor, and really assess conditions of vessels, some that may be submerged, some that may have other debris associated with them, to assess them in a way that would be efficient and economical and thorough. We can deploy these things off the side of a shoreline or a creek without putting a boat in the water even, or use them in conjunction with UAVs and small surface vessels, using sensors such as side scan sonar, in the future multi-beam, and doing it in a low cost, efficient way, using even recreational grade fish finders, if you like. So that's what we're kind of technology infusion exploration part of the project.
Thanks, Tom. We're really excited for this panel. We have a lot of different expertises that range across fields and organizations. So with that, we'll start with our panel panel questions. And we're going to start off on a high note, talking about ADVs. So I'm going to answer all of you. What do you want to highlight in your organization's work in removal, education, and prevention? And we can go in any order.
I'll kick it
Jump
off.
in.
Go ahead, Vince.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So the things that I'd like to highlight is what we've already done. We're pretty new at this game, and build a partnership that includes local, state, federal organizations, also nonprofits, and for-profit companies in this region, work throughout coastal Virginia in the abandoned vessel program. We've also been able to, actually, I'll let Jeff go now because I'm going to talk about verifying a list that he's probably going to talk about first.
Sure. Just to add to that, it's to Vince's point, it's such a diverse network of partners across all sectors and disciplines. And given the capacity of the state in terms of funding and staff, and focus on some of these approaches and responding to these vessels. It's really dependent upon all of our network partners, as I mentioned in my intro, lots of different levels of government. The inventory has been kind of a bear to maintain. It's something that, again, I'm proud of having done, and we took notes out of pages out of other states' playbooks with that, have worked with NOAA as well, but it is just a lot to maintain and the capacity, and we'll talk a little bit with Dr. Allen about some of that ground truthing later in this discussion. So it's a lot of factors, a lot of people doing critical work to come together and help each other out, keep tabs on the problem, and then work towards prevention solutions as well. But I would say that the proudest highlight or high point that we have here is that in January of 2021, at the height of the pandemic, we had nothing. We had no clue. We had no funding. We had no staff working on this issue. It was mentioned in our Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, but more of a line item, not much detail. I helped lead a work group with Clean Virginia Waterways. In about 18 months, we were able to get together some recommendations, which directly led to policy and funding changes through our state legislature. And that allowed us to build out a program with another state agency, the Marine Resources Commission, and then to work with them and all of our other great partners on this panel to implement and go after the vessels and abandon them. But that was pretty lightning quick for government work. It was very robust, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of issues explored, very thorough, a lot of great partners, and happy to answer questions later on that.
So I'll build off of that a little bit. So our project does not necessarily do a ton of work on AD, but I will say that one of the things that I think we're super excited about is building capacity within Virginia Sea Grant to address marine debris. Jeff talks about how during the pandemic, starting at the pandemic, there was really nothing. I think for us with Virginia Sea Grant, we really didn't have much of a focus with debris, and so this is kind of our foray into building marine debris capacity Virginia Sea Grant. But I also want to just talk about the activities of our projects. It's really focused on increasing awareness, offering opportunities to engage, and connecting people and organizations together around this issue of marine debris more broadly. And so I think another highlight is really thinking about that coalition building work that includes youth engagement from K through 12 all the way up to college students. Cleanup efforts in the community to increase the visibility of the issue and making it more real and tangible to residents, and also more importantly, bringing stakeholders together so that they don't feel like they're doing things in isolation, but rather that we're all kind of in this together.
And maybe I'll tack on a little of the technology experimental element of the project, again with the drones. These are issues that may help improve some efficiency in identifying ADVs, particularly in less accessible areas. So think of the upper estuaries and rivers, places that are maybe a little more distant. Well, some of these have been prone to coastal storms, causing derelict vessels or abandonment, in particular. Seen this from North Carolina. So UAVs or on the water drones could assist with that. And the cost is coming down in this technology. It's becoming more accessible outside of the core urban areas of Hampton Roads, where we do have a lot of busy and somewhat secured airspace. It becomes even more feasible. So I want to also underscore, that it's also a means of engagement. There is an increasingly active population of boaters and other watermen that are using sonars that could use drones or autonomous small boats and use them to identify ADVs or submerged vessels or debris that aren't even known. So we're sort of forging ahead. We're also using students in this approach. We currently have been working with students from mechanical and aerospace engineering, graduate students, geography, planning, biology, oceanography, and all the university, and then all the way down to middle schoolers who took up a robotics challenge last fall, and with granted some assistance from some ODU undergraduates, took that all the way to the state, I guess, championship in robotics. And they did this in their own backyard in a creek that was very difficult for any other vessels to navigate that might be looking to, remove debris or to inspect a situation. So the hope is that we can go a little further with this. We take a lot of inspiration on this from Project University of Delaware, also NOAA Marine Debris, I believe, sponsored grant, where they've been using similar drones to map, hence inventory, ghost crab pots by sonar with substantially recreational boater volunteers, and then also basically tag them on a map, build a GIS database, and then go back and retrieve them, also using sonar to kind of pinpoint and then extract these ghost crab pots that are submerged and really not visible in the water. So that's the area that we're generally exploring.
Thank you for that. So yeah, already we talked about different work groups and finding our footing in this movement across this, using statewide and regional partnership efforts to engage all sorts of stakeholders. Talking about the highlights, now we're going to go into what are the greatest challenges that you face in your line of work in ADV removal.
So this is very much up Vince and Jeff's alley, so I'm going to defer to them.
I can say just in general and let Vince talk about the specifics because he's really kind of the boots on the ground with the removal aspect. I would say overall, it gets so cliche to talk about capacity. Everyone has issues with it, always could use more staff and funding. But when I said we started with no staff in the Commonwealth, no funding or no real direction on policy, we got some of the funding to VMRC that was appropriated as a budget item, easy in, easy out as those go, because it was reappropriated after about half of it was spent after a very successful run working with a lot of localities to remove the vessels, completely separate from Lynnhaven River Now's project. So we thought we had a lot of things going on really well together, different pieces of the puzzle, but that went away. Uncertain where the next step will be. Policy has been kind of lurching here and there, streamlining some aspects we can get into later, but there's not really been much action or concerted effort on policy that some of the reports recommendations from 2022, we wanted to revisit some topics. So we're all focused on implementation that takes enough of us to get to remove the vessels. Well, there's the prevention side, there's the turning off the faucet as well. So a lot of work to be done there. And then of course, there's no staff. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about it's about 5% of my job duty at an state agency that has no jurisdiction or authority over ADVs. And I'm helping VMRC, our sister state agency with Marine Resources, which does have the jurisdiction to help them build that program and maintain it. So there's been some staff turnover there as well. It's just quite a challenge when other states have a lot more resources, whether it's proportional to their problems, say Florida with hurricanes and a lot of ADV issues, or just have more of a political will to put forward and staff up.
Yeah, I like to describe it as we're flying this plane as we're building it. City built yet, as Jeff mentioned. We also don't have a lot of the removal and disposal process figured out. We know that we don't want to just take them to the landfill. Something better than that. But we don't have those processes down. And we're just starting to reach out to the communities that are impacted by this and try to get their opinions to start building that prevention piece, which do that as we're removing these vessels, we're just going to end up back in the same place in 5 years.
Yep. And I'd also add too, awareness is big, and that's what the ODU team is doing to make some of these efforts more publicly facing. So it's easier to build support and to build confidence in getting a policy change or advocating for something, which I cannot do as a state employee, but to have a coalition of the willing, of folks who are interested in implementing this and pushing things further. seems to be a pretty an issue that a lot of folks agree upon, a lot of common ground. So I think it's just awareness is really going to help with that, to help drive that interest in finding solutions.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. And I realize we are preaching to the choir here with all these challenges that are not unique just to Virginia. But as we start talking about more of this coalition building approach, let's talk about what sort of technologies we use that may be unique to what we're doing in Virginia that can be applied to larger scale movements. I know in our group, we talk about drones and small autonomous vessels. We have a lot of surveys going around for public opinions and prioritizing removals. Some technologies used in communications and clean marinas, and as technologies for the removal and disposal of vessels. So how can technology help us in our ADV prevention, education, and removal work?
Well, technology, as you mentioned, has helped with, we're using OpinionWorks as one of our partners, and they have the software and the knowledge to perform surveys and a lot of experience in doing that. So through the use of that, we're able to reach out stories that people have to tell and at boat removal, disposal, operations, and the boat owners themselves. Also, I know some of the earlier speakers have already talked about disposal options, and I'd like to talk to them more because getting rid of the fiberglass or even getting the manpower to strip the metals and everything else off of the vessels before they go to the landfill, it's definitely something we need to address. And hopefully the technology is far enough along that we can start using some of it.
Yeah, there has been a lot of, excuse me, a lot of talk about the technologies for disposal and recycling fiberglass. I'll throw it up to Abigail. Can you talk about your Clean Marina program?
Definitely. So some of the things that we consider in the Clean Marina program that we like to see marinas have are things like boat lifts. It can keep boats dry, extend their useful life. We like marinas to think about how they can be eco-conscious, like considering the cleaning products they used, how they're going to sandblast away from the water. And then kind of a cool product we give out to our clean marinas, it's called a fuel fill kit. So boaters fuel through here, and it prevents oil from splashing out into the water and onto their boats by this little beveled system here. So that's kind of one cool thing that we get to give out to our marinas.
I had not seen that before. That's a cool piece of equipment. And that plays into the larger role, not just ADVs, but the associated marine debris from that, from any sort of scraping, the fiberglass, even oil spills, or fuel, as you just said. Vince, as you look at disposing the vessels, you're sending out these surveys, what sorts of things are you finding from those surveys in terms of how to prioritize the vessel removal and increase the disposal capacity, reducing costs?
Well, we're really just getting started in it. Developed a boat owner survey, and we put it out throughout coastal Virginia. Responses are varied by whether you're in a rural community or a urban community. We've seen a few people that said, yeah, I would consider abandoning my vessel, which honest responses. For the most part, it's a lot of things that we kind of expect, that the difficulty with disposing involves sometimes the cost, sometimes the knowledge of how to do it. and that we've also seen a lot of support for developing programs that will make it easier to properly dispose of vessels, including people that are willing to, for the most part, so far, willing to pay into a program that would help remove vessels.
That's amazing. And would be really interesting to know if these same public opinions in terms of paying more for vessel or disposal opportunities apply throughout the rest of the states and North America. And so something to consider as we talk about our local Virginia efforts scaling up to more broad efforts and to everyone attending the summit. Tom, can I pass it down to you to talk about some autonomous vessels for ground
Well,
truthing
I was
and
gonna say, in a little bit larger, wider context, of course, after storms, there's always you know, a big rush and an imperative really to have the port opened. You know, in the macro kind of sense, the captain of the port could basically shut down or open up the port, but we need to ensure the safety of navigation channels. So, you know, there's rapid surveys and hydrographic vessels are responding. In that case, there's you know, incident responses going on, chemical spills, UASs of all kinds, uncrewed autonomous systems, play an increasing role in that because it's a safety factor for all of those incident responses. It reduces the speed of response, the identification or tagging of the locations, and the safety of first responders as well. In a little aftermath context of ADVs, there's still a role, I think, yet to be played, and we'd like to show some of that feasibility to identify vessels. We fly a drone up to it, photograph it, and put it, geotag it from a quadcopter, low cost, even recreational grade quadcopter would, if it's over 250 grams or equal or over, it would be broadcasting a GPS transponder and located, monitored by FAA. First responders, but also the public are the potential crowdsource users of that kind of process. So it'd be interesting to explore. Our inventorying by sonar or a multi-beam survey around a vessel to see, well, is there an engine, down there or off the boat, or other debris associated with it? If it looks like it was removed, was it? After removal, you could do a survey. So these are things where the technology is ahead of the policy and regulation, perhaps. And so demonstration and exploration of those and the cost and the benefits of that is probably the phase we're in. I'll give another example, sort of analogous is, usually technology is replicating something that's already been taking place, but now we're so far ahead, we can do things with drones that we couldn't before. Maybe not removing vessels, but at least inspecting our measurement and monitoring. VMRC was mentioned. They have permit requirements that require measurements and, bathymetry or depth pre and post project. For example, we're leaps ahead of the data capture that was previously acceptable or limited. If we were data limited, now we're data rich, but we haven't incorporated that. So there may be, private sector opportunities down that as, in workforce opportunities, as well as these kind of drone technologies find their place in this kind of bigger ecosystem.
And Tom, you had mentioned crowdsourcing. And so I wanted to take that word and throw it back to Jeff, who is working on an abandoned derelict vessel public survey across Virginia. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as its own technology piece.
Well, that's the technology part is where you got me, because as you and I have been working offline as part of your project, we want to streamline what is essentially a Google Forms survey that was initially distributed to really anyone in this 60 plus person working group, just a large group of folks I mentioned at the beginning. So sort of the indirect spread of that to folks in their organizations, from industry to environmental NGOs to state government. We also put it on a QR code and sent out a flyer, even some laminated copies to marinas across the state. So it was distributed that way. I've posted it on LinkedIn. It's gone out various newsletters and email blasts. But really, we don't have a way of really having a database of how far it's who's actually filled it out, other than on kind of on the receiving end, which is a little bit anonymous, and that's intentionally so, to folks, have candid responses. But it's essentially reporting vessels, their locations, the status that they're in. Are they sunk? Are they moored? Are they drifting? Do they appear to be inhabited? Is there more trash, additional debris to your question earlier? Some of the additional things is leaking fuel. So it is pretty lengthy. We want to tighten it up a little bit so that someone's on their kayak and they have their phone and hopefully, have some waterproofing or some flotation device on it. But if they're willing to go out there in a kayak and take a picture, and then as soon as they're, from the kayak, or if they're back in the car in the parking lot, just kind of dash off a couple of questions and just help us out with verifying the status of the vessel and including a picture. That's really a huge help. But we want to automate that. So instead of me checking a bunch of entries from Google Forms and then putting it into a spreadsheet and having my GIS colleague, Nick, plot it into a map, we want to have it be able to be synced in real time between a Google Forms to Google Sheets for the table, to then Google Maps, or at least save that first between step 1 and step 2. So that's just on the basic level of platforms. I'm open to any other suggestions about how other states and other practitioners have spread the word. That's just on the human side, the communications front. But to Dr. Allen's point about the drones, that beats having to go out on the kayak in the first place. So I think that can be leveraged, both those approaches.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jeff. And again, this whole discussion ties into what are the different things that people, groups, and group partners can do in addressing ADVs and its associated marine debris. And so, continuing this discussion, it's important to acknowledge that where Tom and I work on the Elizabeth River in Virginia, it is a working river. There are ports and shipping lanes. It's not something that can be easily shut down for like trash interception devices, as we talk about technology. And it's something that also needs a lot of public input on, as well as the partnerships between industry and businesses, nonprofits, state agencies. So talking about the different things that we as a coalition can do, just what does this partnership look like in terms of technology use? I know, Abigail, you use contract language when you deal with marinas. We and I have spoken to the Coast Guard, for example, who has different roles. So as we break out of these silos, everyone works and all of our partners work in and come together, what are some of those solutions that can be done using, like, sharing resources? Abigail, can I start with you, since I mentioned the contract language?
Definitely. So I know that I touched on it a little bit, but so we're working on developing language so that marinas can know how to talk to their boaters before it becomes an issue, and that boaters can think about how they're going to maintain their boat and also how they're going to store their boat over time. So this is really just limited to marinas and clean marinas, but it's sort of our little piece that helps. And then also we have a lot of mid-Atlantic groups in the region that are working together. There's Marco, there's NOAA, Prevention, Education, and Outreach, Community of Practice groups. There's lots of groups working together and collaborating, which is a great way for people to get involved.
Joe,
Yeah,
can I
definitely.
piggyback off of that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think I love, Abigail kind of talked about ways that people can get involved. I think bigger picture, recognizing that a lot of these regions, like Virginia, have a marine debris reduction plan. And that was done with a lot of input across sectors. And so what we're struggling with is, how do we get go from a lot of involvement in planning to a lot of involvement in taking action and implementing things to actually get us to achieving the goals that are set out in the plan. And so in terms of what people can do or what we can do, I think I really want to kind of focus on two things. One is as here in Virginia, we're talking about soon kicking off and revising and updating the plan. It's always a moving target in terms of what the goals are for this, but this is another opportunity for people to come together and become more involved and engaged in the planning process. But it does. But then my second point is that it shouldn't stop at just the planning. Continued involvement by small businesses, continued involvement by kids, by college students, by homeowners, by environmental nonprofits, all of those government agencies. That involvement needs to continue beyond planning into the actual now we got to go do the work on the ground. So I think the involvement and the engagement is really important. We tend to talk about providing input into the plan, but once you have a great plan, it's just going to sit there as a plan until people actually then come together and actually execute on that plan. So we need that continued engagement. That's my soapbox.
I'll throw another little technology spin here. It's some of this is sharing and awareness, and like Jeff, granted that the travails of populating and the capability of this database, but there's Virginia has a good coastal GIS database through CZM and all and VIMS, but there are other parts that aren't known, or emerging to that. So the drone data imagery that's collected, there is no home for that. So we by showing a little feasibility here, we might encourage that. Another is, and it's actually prevalent in Virginia, is small satellites that are historically, used for surveillance and tactical military purposes, to be honest, are growing in their civil applications and public safety. And so, we have every day 3-meter and better satellite imagery being collected over the coast. So perhaps, in a partnership, we could actually look at that type of technology. There's some of it is optical satellite, some of it is synthetic aperture radar, sees through the clouds. And so we could actually, down the road, have, kind of monitoring system where satellites detect something, and then, maybe there is an ADV vessel or even someone in distress, in some areas. So mainstreaming those is as a little bit of technology that could be further explored. And I think coming back to drones itself, engaging the public and citizens in that has some other analogs. I mentioned the Ghost Crab Pot, which is extensively anglers, fisher folks just volunteering, strapping on some sonars to their boats and mowing the lawn across Delaware Bay and so on. But using those resources, people want to get involved and offer some time, could be an application there with the autonomous vessels as well.
And go ahead, Vince.
I just wanted to add on a little bit to what we was saying. If you watch the keynote speaker earlier in this event, he mentioned the bringing out the kids. If you want to solve a problem, bring out the kids. So involvement of our Environmental Studies Academy high schoolers, our ODU doctoral students, all the youth in this area have been involved and need to continue to be involved because they really do bring a lot to the table for the solution. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that share your stories. That really has an impact on this program. Jeff was mentioning earlier the surveys and getting information from that kayaker and as much information as you can get while you're out there, and then share it so that we know the history behind the vessel, and it'll help us figure out, okay, who actually has the title to this thing. And that's another big part, is share those stories. It'll also help us figure out how to prevent this from coming back in the future.
And as we talk about youth involvement, education, it's also worth noting that some high schoolers do need community service hours. So they might be looking for some volunteer opportunities as well. I just want to remind everyone to feel free to put your questions in the chat as we now turn it over to our audience Q&A portion of our panel. So our first question here is, what does media outreach look like for your organizations about these issues and solutions? And I wonder if I can start with if we can talk about our resource hub as a form of media outreach.
That's probably a good place to start. We don't do targeted media outreach, but really thinking about how in one more centralized location, we can provide a variety of informational resources that other people can then use and take and kind of inform the work that we do. So as part of our project, we have created a resource hub. It's primarily focused more on our narrower geographic area, but a lot of these resources are ones that can extend beyond the Hampton Roads area to other parts of coastal Virginia. So I think media efforts, I think, are good, but I think what I particularly enjoy about this resource hub is that it's something that is available for other people when they might actually need those resources. It's available 24/7 and at the convenience of people who need the information. So rather than being pushed out at specific times or through specific media, it's something that can be very easily accessed when people actually need them.
Yeah, the easy accessibility and constant public accessibility is really important to get these resources out so people can act on these resources on an organizational scale and an individual scale. And in terms of also media outreach, I'll provide some more talking points we can go on. Jeff, there was an article about the Nansemond ADV removal. That was an actual news story. Abigail, you've shared Facebook posts and social media posts about the new certifications. And I know, Vince, you were at a boat show in Virginia Beach doing some tabling exhibits to get the surveys out there. Can you speak on those types of outreach as well?
Sure, real quick. I mean, I think it's from a state employee perspective, with, again, to reiterate that DEQ does not have the jurisdiction over these vessels or the authority to remove them. And CZM being a convening organization that really is non-regulatory, but is bringing partners together and assisting others. I think it was really, anyone can Google abandoned vessels in Virginia. Things will pop up. A lot of videos, a lot of orders have been on the ground, especially in Hampton Roads. What has been really beneficial is really capitalizing on opportunities when I'm invited to be interviewed by a media outlet to encapsulate the whole process. Dr. Youssef mentioned before the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan. CZM was at the forefront of that. We had a lot of support from our partners, including many here in this call way back in 2014, but it was really our effort being funded by NOAA to create that framework and to get all the expertise from our partners. So this was an issue that wasn't necessarily acted upon then, but it evolved over time, and it was not like we weren't doing anything. And I also pointed to the lack of resources from the state side of things. So you hear about things in the media, you try to grasp the narrative and really show all sides about what was internally going on, and then how we can continue to build support and awareness through projects like ODUs to bring even more people involved and leverage all those resources. So it's really been responding to requests from the media, but we can definitely do a better job about being more proactive. There's stuff, and you can visit the DEQ website in Virginia and look down the CZM program page. We have some videos they're very digestible, but you have to kind of go down a couple layers of the web page to find abandoned and derelict vessels and to see those videos. So we're hoping that with the ODU project and the website that y'all just talked about, that will be more public facing and public friendly, I think, in terms of smaller bits of information and able to for folks to report vessels and feel empowered that they can really make a difference in real time, is how I would kind of talk about the approach that I've experienced.
As far as how the boat show went, it was interesting because the people there to buy boats were not that open to talking about things right then and there. But the organizations that were there, the fishing clubs, the boat clubs, I got more speaking engagements out of that, just having them stop by, that have allowed me to spread the word on the surveys and the programs throughout.
Yeah, I can imagine that the people there shopping for boats wouldn't be interested in talking about getting rid of their boats. But yeah, it's still a valuable outreach source, and that those are the people that you need to reach. And Abigail, can you talk a little bit about any outreach you might do for clean marinas?
Yes, so we were just talking about this in one of my classes. You know, as scientists and environmental advocates, we do public relations when we don't even really realize that's what we're doing. So it's an opportunity to really engage in science communication, and share what we're doing, because a lot of the time the public doesn't know what we're doing. So we can share when we certify a clean marina or when we're removing an ADV or anything like that. And it's, I think, just a good opportunity to share with people who don't know what we're doing, and just a little PR science communication work.
Definitely, thank you. Other questions are there success stories or best practices for marinas dealing with abandoned vessels? Some marinas will go through the state or local process, but others will simply tow it out and leave it in the public trust waters. So, any success stories for marinas dealing with abandoned vessels? And that might
I'm
go
not
back to
there
the
yet.
contact language.
We are putting out a survey that's based for marinas probably next week, to gather more information on how marinas are dealing with the problem. We're also going to be putting out surveys to towers and disposers and boat sales organizations.
Yeah, and unfortunately not as much success with privately owned marinas, which I believe are the vast majority in Virginia. We early on met with at least 4 of them across the coastal zone, and really the problems were all similar in the sense that they're losing money, potentially slips could be damaged from sinking vessels, just trying to find some solutions similar to renting space in an apartment and tenant contracts and that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Unfortunately, there are some instances where things happen in the middle of the night, the boat drifts away, and then suddenly it's a public trust resource issue and state-owned bottom. But we have had some success with VMRC's state funding, the grant program I mentioned earlier, going to localities who, if they are own a municipal, publicly owned marina, there is at least one instance where one of those marinas was able to submit for funding, get it from the state, and remove those vessels. So again, limited to their property basically, but successful in some small bits.
And do Virginia marinas have any kind of standards? The question goes on to say, yeah, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that some marinas do already have language in their contracts. Not all of them do, but it's something that marinas are starting to think about kind of as it becomes more, people become more aware of it. And, you know, as we're doing this public relations work, it's starting to become more talked about.
All right. Thank you so much. We are